Hey, what's up everyone? Today I'm going to tell you a story that's going to shake you to your core. It's about courage, about proving yourself when everyone doubts you, and about how a single moment can transform a boy into a legend. This is the story of Private First Class Daniel Carter, a 21-year-old kid who everyone in his unit saw as weak, too skinny, too green for combat. They laughed at him during training. They made jokes behind his back. But on October 12, 2009, in the mountains of Afghanistan, this same soldier that nobody believed in would do something that would leave even the toughest Marines speechless. He would save 75 lives in one night, alone, under enemy fire. And what happened in those hours would change military history forever. So buckle up, because this story is going to blow your mind. Daniel Carter grew up in a small town in Nebraska, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. He was never the athletic type, never the guy who stood out in a crowd. Standing at 5'7" and weighing barely 140 pounds, Daniel looked more like a high school student than a soldier. But he had something burning inside him, something his father, a Vietnam veteran, had planted deep in his soul since childhood. Honor, duty, the willingness to serve something bigger than himself. When Daniel enlisted in the United States Army in the spring of 2008, his drill sergeants looked at him with skepticism. During basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia, he struggled with the physical demands. While other recruits breezed through obstacle courses and ruck marches, Daniel fought for every single step. He finished last in almost every run. He could barely do 15 push-ups when the standard was 42. The other soldiers started calling him Baby Carter and the Kid. Some questioned if he would even make it through training. But Daniel had something they didn't see. He had heart. He had determination that ran deeper than muscle. Every night after lights out, he would sneak outside and do extra push-ups, extra sit-ups, extra everything. He studied the manuals until his eyes burned. He memorized every protocol, every procedure, every piece of equipment. What he lacked in physical strength, he made up for in pure obsession with being the best soldier he could be. By the time he graduated basic training and advanced individual training, Daniel had transformed himself just enough to pass. He was assigned to the 10th Mountain Division, a light infantry unit with a proud history of fighting in the most brutal terrains on Earth. In July 2009, his unit received deployment orders. They were heading to Afghanistan, to Kunar province, one of the most dangerous regions in the entire country. Taliban forces controlled the mountains, and American casualties were mounting every single week. Daniel's squad leader, Staff Sergeant Marcus Hayes, was a hardened combat veteran with 3 tours under his belt. When he saw Daniel step off the Chinook helicopter at Forward Operating Base Phoenix, Hayes just shook his head. "Great," he muttered to another sergeant. "They sent us a kid who looks like he should be serving coffee, not serving his country." The other soldiers laughed. Daniel heard it. He said nothing, he just grabbed his gear and got to work. For the first 2 months in country, Daniel was given the jobs nobody else wanted. He pulled more guard duty shifts than anyone. He carried extra ammunition for the squad automatic weapon. He volunteered for every detail, every mission, no matter how dangerous or mundane. The other soldiers started to respect his work ethic, but they still didn't think much of his combat abilities. "He's a good kid," one of them said. "But when bullets start flying, I don't want him covering my 6. Then came October 10th, 2009. Intelligence reported that a village called Kamdesh, located in a valley surrounded by steep mountains, was at extreme risk. Taliban forces were massing in the area, and there were approximately 75 Afghan civilians, including women and children, trapped in the village along with a small contingent of Afghan National Army soldiers. The mission was clear: extract the civilians and the ANA forces before the Taliban overran the village completely. Bravo Company, Daniel's unit, was tasked with the humanitarian evacuation. It was supposed to be a straightforward operation. Get in, load up the civilians and ANA personnel into trucks and helicopters, and get out before nightfall. But in Afghanistan, nothing ever goes according to plan. On October 11th, at 0500 hours, Bravo Company moved out. 28 American soldiers, 4 armored Humvees and 2 transport trucks rolled down the mountain roads toward Kamdesh. Daniel sat in the back of the lead Humvee, his M4 carbine resting across his lap, his heart pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. This was his first real mission outside the wire into hostile territory. Staff Sergeant Hayes looked back at him. "You good, Carter?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, Sergeant. Stay sharp, keep your head down, follow orders, you'll be fine." They reached Kamdesh at 0730. The village was eerily quiet. Smoke rose from a few buildings that had been hit by mortar fire the night before. Frightened civilians emerged slowly from their homes, women clutching children, old men with weathered faces that had seen too many wars. The Afghan National Army soldiers looked exhausted, low on ammunition and morale. Captain Richard Boone, the company commander, set up a perimeter and began organizing the evacuation. The plan was to load the civilians and ANA personnel into the trucks first, then move them to a landing zone half a mile outside the village where helicopters would extract them. It was going to take 3 trips, but the Taliban had been watching, waiting. At 0915, as the first group of civilians was being loaded into the trucks, the mountains erupted. RPGs screamed down from the ridgelines. Machine gun fire ripped through the air. Mortars exploded in the center of the village. The Taliban had the high ground, and they had Bravo Company surrounded on 3 sides. "Contact! Contact! Left and right!" someone screamed over the radio. The Americans scattered, diving for cover behind walls and vehicles. The Afghan civilians panicked, running in every direction. Children were screaming. Explosions shook the ground. Daniel found himself pressed against a mud wall, his rifle up, scanning for targets. He could see muzzle flashes from the mountains, at least 50 Taliban fighters firing down into the village. Captain Boone tried to maintain order over the radio. "All units, return fire. Secure the civilians, we need close air support now." But the radio crackled back with bad news. "Negative on CAS, weather is too bad for air support. You're on your own down there." The firefight intensified. One of the Humvees took a direct hit from an RPG and exploded into flames. 3 American soldiers were inside. They didn't make it out. Another mortar landed directly on one of the transport trucks, killing 2 more soldiers and a dozen civilians instantly. Blood stained the dirt streets. The smell of burning metal and flesh filled the air. Daniel was firing his M4, trying to hit the Taliban fighters on the ridgeline, but they were too far away and too well concealed. His squad was pinned down behind a compound wall, taking fire from multiple directions. Staff Sergeant Hayes was on the radio, calling for reinforcements, for helicopters, for anything. Then the worst happened. An RPG hit the building where Captain Boone and half of the command element were coordinating the evacuation. The explosion was massive. When the smoke cleared, Captain Boone was dead, along with 2 lieutenants and the senior medic. Bravo Company had just lost its leadership. Hayes grabbed the radio. "All units, this is Hayes. Command is down. I'm taking charge. We need to consolidate and get these civilians out now, or we're all dead." But before he could issue orders, another wave of fire came down. A sniper round hit Hayes in the chest. His body armor stopped it, but the impact knocked him unconscious. The squad's second in command, Sergeant Mike Torres, tried to move forward, and a burst of machine gun fire tore through his legs. He went down screaming. In less than 15 minutes, Bravo Company had gone from a controlled evacuation to absolute chaos. Of the 28 American soldiers who entered Kamdesh, 11 were dead, 9 were wounded, and the rest were scattered across the village, trying desperately to hold their positions. The Afghan National Army soldiers had run, abandoning their posts. The 75 civilians were trapped in the center of the village, huddled in a mosque, terrified and helpless. And in the middle of all this carnage, Private First Class Daniel Carter, the kid everyone had called weak, found himself as the only able-bodied soldier near the mosque. Daniel looked around at the devastation, bodies everywhere. His friends, men he had trained with, eaten with, laughed with, were dead or dying. His hands were shaking. His mind was screaming at him to run, to hide, to survive. Every instinct told him he was going to die, but then he heard it. The sound of a child crying inside the mosque. Daniel took a breath. He looked at his rifle. He looked at the Taliban fighters moving down from the mountains, closing in on the village, and he made a decision. He wasn't going to run. He was going to fight. Daniel moved to the entrance of the mosque. Inside, he found 75 people. Afghan civilians, children, women, elderly men, all pressed together in terror. They looked at him with desperate eyes. He didn't speak their language, but he didn't need to. He held up his hand in a calming gesture, then stepped back outside. The Taliban were advancing in 3 groups, moving through the village streets, clearing buildings. They were less than 200 meters away. Daniel could hear them shouting, coordinating their assault. They thought the Americans were finished. They thought this was going to be a massacre. Daniel keyed his radio. "Any station, this is Carter. I have 75 civilians at the mosque. I need immediate extract. Over." Static. Then a weak voice. "Carter, this is Hayes. I'm hit. Everyone's hit. Air support is 30 minutes out. You need to hold that position." Roger that. Daniel set up his position. He dragged ammunition crates from a destroyed Humvee. He found 3 extra rifles from fallen soldiers and lined them up. He pulled grenades from his vest and set them within reach. He checked his medical supplies. He had 4 magazines left for his M4. Maybe 120 rounds, against at least 60 Taliban fighters. The odds were impossible, but Daniel didn't care about odds anymore. He cared about those 75 lives inside that mosque. The Taliban's first assault came at 09:45. A group of 12 fighters moved toward the mosque from the eastern street. Daniel waited until they were 60 meters away, then opened fire. His shots were precise, controlled. 3 Taliban fighters went down immediately. The others scattered for cover, shocked that there was still resistance. Daniel switched to his second rifle, conserving ammunition. He fired in short bursts, forcing the Taliban to keep their heads down. They returned fire, bullets smashing into the walls around him, but Daniel kept moving, changing positions every few shots, never staying in one place. The Taliban tried to flank him. 4 fighters moved around through a destroyed building to his left. Daniel saw them coming. He grabbed a grenade, pulled the pin, counted to 2, and threw it perfectly through a window. The explosion tore through the building. Silence followed. For the next hour, Daniel fought alone. He held off wave after wave of Taliban assaults. He used every tactic he had learned in training, every lesson his father had taught him about staying calm under pressure. When he ran out of ammunition for his M4, he switched to another rifle. When that ran dry, he used his pistol. When his pistol was empty, he used grenades. The Taliban couldn't believe it. One American soldier, a kid they couldn't even see clearly, was holding off their entire force. They tried mortars, but their aim was off, and they risked hitting their own men. They tried snipers, but Daniel was too fast, too unpredictable. At 1100 hours, Daniel heard the sound he had been praying for. Helicopters. Apache gunships roared over the mountains, their cannons ripping into the Taliban positions. The enemy fighters broke and ran for the hills. Within minutes, Chinook transport helicopters landed outside the village. Daniel stood up slowly. His hands were black with gunpowder. His uniform was soaked with sweat and blood, some his own from shrapnel wounds he hadn't even noticed. He turned to the mosque and motioned for the civilians to come out. They emerged slowly, staring at him in disbelief. This one small American soldier had saved them all. The surviving members of Bravo Company, including a wounded Staff Sergeant Hayes, watched as Daniel helped load every single civilian onto the helicopters. Not one was left behind. 75 lives saved. As the last helicopter lifted off, Hayes limped over to Daniel and grabbed his shoulder. "Carter," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I was wrong about you, kid. We all were." Daniel just nodded, too exhausted to speak. Later, after the smoke cleared and the dead were counted, the full story emerged. Private First Class Daniel Carter had single-handedly held off a Taliban force more than 10 times his size for over 2 hours. He had expended over 300 rounds of ammunition, thrown 8 grenades, and neutralized at least 21 enemy combatants. He had been wounded 3 times, but refused medical attention until every civilian was safe. The military awarded Daniel the Silver Star for valor in combat. The ceremony was held at Fort Drum, New York, 6 months later. His entire unit attended, including Staff Sergeant Hayes, who stood in the front row with tears in his eyes. When they pinned that medal on Daniel's chest, every soldier in that room stood and saluted. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy." Private First Class Carter's extraordinary heroism and selflessness under the most intense combat conditions saved the lives of 75 civilians and prevented a humanitarian catastrophe. His actions reflect the highest traditions of military service and bring great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. But for Daniel, the real reward came months later when he received a letter from Afghanistan. It was from a father whose 3 children had been in that mosque. The letter, translated into English, read simply, "You are our hero. We will never forget what you did. May God bless you forever." Daniel kept that letter in his pocket for the rest of his deployment and every deployment after. It reminded him why he had joined the army in the first place. Not for glory, not for recognition, but to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. Wow. What an incredible story, right? This is what real heroism looks like. It's not about being the biggest or the strongest. It's about having the courage to stand up when everyone else has fallen. It's about refusing to quit when quitting would be so much easier. Now, I need to tell you something important. This story is a dramatized, fictionalized narrative created for educational and entertainment purposes. While it's not a real documented event, stories like this one happened frequently during the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Countless soldiers, many of them young and underestimated just like Daniel, performed acts of extraordinary bravery that saved lives and changed history. The purpose of this story is to honor those real heroes and to remind us that courage doesn't come in one size. Sometimes the person everyone doubts becomes the person everyone depends on. So now I want to ask you, what did you think of this story? Did it move you? Did it make you think differently about what it means to be a hero? Do you know any stories like this? Maybe from a family member who served or from your own region? Stories of people who proved everyone wrong? Share them in the comments. I'd love to read them. And tell me, what city are you watching this from? Are you in the United States, Brazil, somewhere else in the world? Drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far this story is reaching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Share this video with someone who needs to hear a message about courage and never giving up. Thank you so much for watching. Until the next story, stay strong, stay brave, and never let anyone tell you what you're capable of.